So good evening. It's great to see all of you and to be part of this Art Now series, and I want to thank your instructor Susan Edelstein and the TAs for the invitation. I'm here with, as you'll hear, Xiong and Jenny Jaramillo, and we're all a part of a really exciting project which began as a research undertaking in Ecuador, looking at areas of historical mining as it related to the environment and basically social, the sort of social context. And this kind of work, I think, is the sort of thing that I as an artist have done some of in a lot of different contexts. So this evening what I want to do is actually focus on the kind of collaborative sorts of things that I've done. But when I talk about collaboration, it could be with people, but it might also be with things. So objects in a museum collection, for example. So that's my sort of overarching theme. And I should tell you that in as much as I'm talking about my work as if I'm highly engaged in social questions and problems, and I think I am, you'll see that a lot of my work has a strong kind of aesthetic aspect to it. And by that I mean that I'm really interested in a kind of a visual presentation and a visual sensibility that's enveloping, that's beautiful, that draws the viewer to itself. Because I actually do think that even though artists are often interested in social questions, that the aesthetic or the visual can have great power in actually engaging people through their senses and through modes of participation, if you will, that we often don't think of when we think of trying to actually talk about social issues, social problems. So you'll see that in a certain sense, rather than a talk, you could say this is going to be a quick tour through a lot of projects I've done, all of which I think of in relation to this notion of something like collaboration. So the first little series is from the Dark Ages, 1995 and 99. And these are projects that I did with various galleries where I was looking at their works and their collection. So this is at the Burnaby Art Gallery, which was a former manse or a former mansion, and it's in Burnaby, BC. And so I did this project called Reentering the House of Flowers, where I was really interested in the notion of the home as a feminized or a kind of paradigmatically feminized space. And the way that I, as an artist, might intervene with that. My partner was pregnant with our first child, and so I was very aware of the home as her body as the home of our child yet to be born. And so this is the project that I did, and you can see, actually I guess it was our second child because our first child is in the video. This is in the olden days of trying to deal with new technology and do something spectacular, which now seems almost pathetic, but there was a projected video of my son climbing a rope in pajamas and me or a ladder and me climbing a rope. And the wallpaper was William Morris wallpaper, within which I had interjected images of men in some sort of action. And so there's rope climbers, there's fly fishermen, and astronauts. There was also these collages where I like the idea of a kind of camouflaged artwork within the artwork, so that the wallpaper is a kind of the artwork of the home, and the collages are more kind of traditional artwork, we could say, in terms of their structure. And there was another part of the exhibition. This was handmade wallpaper with little images of fetuses in development. Seems a bit loaded. It's not an anti-abortion diatribe, but you know, I was interested in using something that has a kind of loaded reading and seeing how that might play in the exhibition. And so this was, this is an exhibition I actually produced most of while I was here in London, had just moved here for the job at Western. The next thing I'm showing you is called Loot Bags, and it was done at the Art Gallery of Windsor at the time when they were actually in the mall. And so I was thinking about I was thinking about my son going to birthday parties and the preoccupation with the loot bag at the end. People always want to take stuff away. And thinking about the gallery as a kind of place where, in essence, sometimes we have a hard time just kind of looking without touching, or the idea that we're looking and we can't purchase. So the gift shop often becomes kind of an important environment. So I looked at these objects from the collection from around the time when I was born, so the 50s. These were Canadian modernist paintings, and also not all the artifacts were from the time I was born, and basically designed these kind of logo types and printed these woodcut shopping bags, giant shopping bags that people would see when they came into the gallery, and then they could actually take a number and give it in at the gift shop, and they would get a free shopping bag. So lots of artists have done these kind of exchange projects, and this was mine. And then the third one where I was engaging with a museum was, in this case, actually the structure of the museum, and in fact this was a gallery within a library. So this is in Regina, and so I did some research into the earlier architectural configuration of the Dunlop Public Library. And I ultimately built a structure out of just lightweight metal studs, onto which I assembled a vinyl that was printed with a pattern based on the crest of the library, and made this kind of ghost of the former library. And so one of the notions was that with the history of modern architecture, often there's a kind of dismissal of the past in favor of a kind of utopic representation of what is now and what looks toward the future. So this memento flori was a kind of flowered memorial to the sort of past architectural edifice that had been replaced by this modernist building built in the 60s. It's not a sort of cry to bring back classical design, but more the idea that it's interesting to kind of insert something historical into a modern environment. Now I'm going to move on, and I'm sorry to kind of race through this, but that's what we're doing tonight, and talk about some collaborative projects. Susan mentioned this one called Art and Cold Cash. I had lived in northern Canada. Actually, my wife and I were teaching Inuit children for a couple of years in the late 1980s. And so having had that experience in the north, and also having an interest in ideas of currency and exchange, I got together with two Canadian artists from southern Canada, Jack Butler and Sheila Butler, and then two artists from northern Canada, from Baker Lake, Rubyar Naknak, who just died last year, and William Noah, who's a very important artist and quite senior now. And we came up with this project called Art and Cold Cash, and the idea was to look at the history of Inuit art, Inuit production in relation to money. Why? Well, in part because when Inuit art, so-called, was introduced as a way of working into communities that had fundamentally just begun in the 1950s, it was a form of economic development. So Inuit people, having been nomadic people, didn't have typically sort of art forms that were large scale or kind of fetishized an object that was collectible. So when they came into these communities and they were more sedentary, the government actually established these economic development projects, and one of them was art making and actual printmaking and sculpture making. But one of the things that came along with that was the introduction of money, of the kinds of currency that we have, because prior to that, Inuit people had been involved largely in a barter system. Even with the Bay, they would bring in furs and exchange for goods from the Bay according to the height of the stack of furs, for example. So, you know, for some of these people, they had remarkable stories of their first recollection of the use of currency as we know it. So fundamentally, you could say that art was used to introduce capitalist exchange. So what we did, I received a grant, and we worked together to try and think up some projects that would engage the community and produce art, but also produce a kind of awareness both on the part of people in southern Canada and also people in northern Canada. So we began with some public meetings where we talked about the project, And then eventually we held some residencies where quite established artists came and worked alongside us. And eventually we produced an exhibition of some of the work of the artists from the north and some of our own work. I made a series of drawings which were called Drawn Like Money. And so I was interested in the sort of language of engraving as something that you could think of as a bearer of a notion of something valuable. So if you think of a stamp or you think of currency, the sort of engraved mark that we're aware of, and these are ones done with pen. They all had a kind of landscape look to them, but I was really trying to imitate the look of an engraved line. And with that, suggest the possibility that this was a form of, or it was a kind of representation that in and of itself talked about value. And on the other hand, a lot of the images I made had some relationship to even the sort of degradation of the environment, because that was certainly something that we heard about, and this project really started in about 2004. That was something we certainly heard about from the local Inuit people in Baker Lake as a matter of great concern. So these are just some installation shots from the project. William Noah, who is the artist from Baker Lake I mentioned, those were large drawings that he did that show this kind of movement between a sort of traditional and modern form of economic development or labor. Jack Butler made this drawing table which you could touch, and actual different language, basically sounds in Inuktitut and English would emanate forth. And Sheila Butler did this kind of collage drawing, and it was called this wonderful title, Reach Out a Hand in the Dark. And I think her idea was that, in a certain sense, when you participate in capitalist exchange, you are kind of reaching out a hand in the dark. You don't quite know what your role in capitalism is. And so we had several exhibitions, as Susan said. This was at the McLaren Art Center. And the other thing we did was we had exhibitions in airports, because in northern Canada, airports are almost like community centers. That's where you see everybody gathered to send off their family or to welcome their family back. And so we decided that in the north, that would be the best place to have exhibitions. But this was actually an exhibition at Pearson Airport of a series of bookworks we did to represent the project. So that was a specific project involving exchange and collaboration. And then these are some other related works that I did. I did a series called Cold Storage, where I was actually looking at images of, you could say, garbage and detritus in the landscape. And I had this exhibition in a couple of different galleries. It involved drawings, and this what almost looks like a kind of modernist igloo, although it wasn't exactly meant to be, that was made of refuse styrofoam. And these were drawings of skidoo parts that I photographed and basically worked with on mylar. And I showed them as if you're seeing them through a kind of a museum window. And so other images of fundamentally garbage in the landscape. And this is the way the work looked when it was shown at the Art Gallery of Windsor. This was the other version of the sort of structure. I called it a small museum. It was almost like a storage container. And within that environment, there was also these mountain-like forms which were based on images of snowbanks that I had drawn in the north. And I also had a series of glass bones that I made with a glass artist. I had been collecting bones in the landscape and decided to translate them into this almost a kind of idealized form of refuse. And that would be another thing I could add in terms of collaboration, that in this case, I was working with a glass artist. So I think as an artist, it's important for me to know how to do certain things with my hands, but also not to be limited by that. And so to work with other producers is always a really important opportunity for me. And this was an image of an abandoned house in Baker Lake that I was really interested in. So at a certain point, I photographed it from 24 different vantage points. I was interested in it for several reasons. Partly how unlikely it was to put a flat-roofed house in an environment where you get so much snow. And I did some research about architecture in the North and some architectural programs that tended to be quite utopic and idealistic. And so this seemed to be a kind of abandonment of that. So I made a series of 24 drawings where the house was sort of disappeared, and I was actually using some details from J.M.W. Turner engravings of water and sky. And so I made these ink drawings, and I made 24 of them. And ultimately, I turned it into both an animation, where it seemed to be a house spinning in the weather, and also this was a series of those same images printed on plexiglass, so that when you move, there's a sense that this image won't quite stay still. Okay. Following from that, I started working on the theme of water. And as Susan mentioned, I had a grant, and I worked with ultimately about 10 artists, Xiong being one of them. The project was called Immersion, Emergencies, and Possible Worlds. But just prior to that, I did a couple of projects involving structures that relate to water that I'll show you. So this first project was at the Kamloops Art Gallery, where Susan used to be the curator. And I initially started with a project working with Indigenous students in a local school. Basically, we were drawing water, so I was interested in working with the community. And ultimately made these banners that were part of my exhibition, but then went back to the school, and there was also members of the community that made drawings. I think the design is a little bit heavy-handed, but I know that one of the things that was really important to me was that everybody's drawing would actually be represented, and that all the names of those who participated would be on the drawings. So there was certainly kind of some ethical questions around participating with others and how they get credited for their work. And then I made this exhibition called Book of the River. It was actually a three-part exhibition. It was the work with the community, it was my work, based on further kind of investigations around the Turner images of water. And then I also curated an exhibition of images of water from the collection of the gallery. These are the engravings by J.M.W. Turner that I was looking at. So you can see the fine detail, and this takes us back a little bit to my interest in engraving that I mentioned earlier. And then these were my sort of abstractions, and they were just called, I actually can't remember the title of these, but they were my abstractions, working with the Turner engravings on a light table, working with a pen, working with a brush, and then ultimately printing onto plexiglass. I also made these sort of raft-like objects, and my wife actually crocheted these nets for me, which I have reprised in several projects. And I also printed some of those same images on canvas. They were actually digitally printed on canvas and shown like that. So that was that project in Kamloops. The other one happened at this, happened at this tile museum in France, in Barthette. And so this is a museum that actually collects tiles that were made in the region and shows them and invites contemporary artists in to make projects. And the place itself used to be a bath, a bain, where people would come to take the waters. So it had a kind of tower in the center, and I was thinking about water towers. I had been photographing water towers for a long time. So I made a project called Chateau d'Eau, which is water tower in French. This was actually the studio they gave me. It looks quite romantic. And what I did was to look around at these amazing water tower structures in this region in southern France around Toulouse. Looked pretty futuristic. And then I eventually made a kind of water tower structure. I worked in a way I have several times, and that is I did a print and then I laminated it, glued it onto 2x4s onto wood, although the sizes of wood in France are a little different, and ultimately made this structure. And there was some small kind of panel pieces attendant to that. And then when you would, this is shown a bit differently, but when you would walk around it, then you would see this kind of the blue side of the structure. So in essence, I wasn't really sort of trying to say anything about water. It's more like I took an interest in human activities and human structures that relate to water. And now I'm moving on to some final projects that I want to talk about that also relate to the theme of water. The first of them was called Voyager, and I had been invited to McMaster Museum of Art, which has a wonderful graphic art collection, a wonderful print collection. And at the time, just after this, I think, is the image here? No, maybe here? I'll have to show it to you after. There's an image I have of a model, or the sinking of a replica ship, the Bounty, during Hurricane Sandy in New York. And so I was thinking about this as an amazing emblem of our environmental times, an interest in history and human, basically colonialism. And so I was thinking about shipwrecks. And at the same time, looking at the prints in their collection, I became particularly interested in the prints of Hogarth and also the prints of Dürer. The Dürer prints were from a series called The Ship of Fools, which, you know, you've probably all sort of read or heard of this notion of the Ship of Fools. We're all on it. Nobody can escape it. And so Dürer's series of The Ship of Fools is a real wonderful kind of study of kind of human foibles, human weakness. And there's one subtitle that says something like, of producing something that is sometimes to be laughed at, or something like that. And I thought, oh, that's a great description of the artist. So I was interested in the idea of the artist as aboard the Ship of Fools. And a particular print I was interested in was this one called The Times from 1762, which was during the 30 Years' War in Europe. And Hogarth was particularly trying to show society in disarray. And I thought, well, I have to say, we seem to be living in a time where this probably needs to speak to us in some way. So that was one image I was interested in. I had been starting to make these are tiny balsa wood structures, studies of shipwrecks. And so ultimately, I put together some details from those Hogarth and Turner prints that were digitally printed onto the wood. You'll see some close-ups. And I made these large-scale wall-based models of these ships. I also, this is a bit cute, but I invited, I think, about 12 artists to be stowaways on my voyage. And so they each gave me an artifact that kind of represented them, that I showed on top of that net. And this is the way I showed some of the work from the collection. So it was a great opportunity, at the same time a bit scary, you know, to show artists like Turner and Dürer and me. Could be a little loaded. But at the same time, what I tried to do was show my work in dialogue with theirs. And that's a close-up of that particular piece. And those are some of the little balsa wood studies that I did. And those are details of all the little things that people offered me. Kelly Jasvat gave me one of her plastic objects. So everybody got their object back, but in the catalog, all of it was documented. Okay, and just to move on fairly quickly to the end of my section, when I was in India, I had with one of my sons, we were going to visit an NGO that I have some association with. I started documenting these images of water towers because this was the area where the tsunami had been particularly destructive. And so I was interested in this idea of a structure that both contains water, or a structure that does contain water, and what that means in the face of the sort of destruction that comes from water, as it did in this area of India. And so after a period of making some tiny models, I started making these structures which are flat, and they're printed with images and passages of water from a whole series of sources and references. And I called these water towers, but they don't hold water. They refer to the notion of building a tower. So, and maybe even the pathos of trying to build a tower and what that might mean. And so these are some examples of other tower structures I made. And this was more like a water fence. And I also made a piece, I had a show in Winnipeg, as Susan mentioned. I made a piece dedicated to the flooding of the Red River. So this was just a tiny model that I made. And then I eventually made this table piece. It's called Water Memory Table. And these are just some images of the installation. This was the replica ship that I mentioned that was a kind of sad inspiration for some of this work. After doing those pieces I just showed you, I was interested in the possibility of using water as a lens. So I actually took some photographs of that Hogarth print underwater. It wasn't the original, it was a laminated copy. And I used them as the basis for making these patterns on wood for these other so-called shipwreck pieces. And these are fairly large. They're, sort of, I don't know, in meters. I guess they'd be about 3 meters by 2 meters. And you can see that they have an almost like a insect-like quality. I didn't want them necessarily to be so literal as the notion of a shipwreck, but to have this kind of very precarious kind of quality to them. And this is just some details of those. Most of it is printed digitally. Some of my work is silkscreen, but a lot is printed digitally. And then there's some rubber stamped work that I did on there as well. And this was the last one, and it was based on that image of the Bounty. And you can see there's details of different photographic renderings of water. And there's also some handwriting there from some documents that I found in the Manitoba archives that refer to basically other periods when flooding of the Red River occurred. Last thing I'm going to show you is just a few images of the Project Immersion Emergencies. There's Xiong on the far right on the second row. This was when we had our residency at Banff. And it was a wonderful opportunity to get together as a group of artists to work both independently and collaboratively on our work. Eventually, we realized this exhibition called The Source, Rethinking Water Through Contemporary Art. And those are all the people in the exhibition. In the exhibition here that will be opening tomorrow night, not only am I and Xiong involved, but also Gautam Guru, who is an MFA graduate from Western, originally from India. And so his work was included in this project and is included in the one you could come to tomorrow night. This is a work by Soheila Esfahani, who was a student here at Western. She's originally from Iran. And so one of the things she was interested in is the way water is treated both ritually and even treated in some ways quite generously in a culture such as in Iran, where if somebody comes to your door, the first thing you do is offer them a glass of water. In this case, she made a series of porcelain bowls and arranged them to look like a carpet. And this is a video by Gautam Guru, where he actually documented the 2 hours per day when the women in a particular house in Varanasi are able to pump the water in order to, provide water to the family. There's a great moment when the dog comes through. The point of view is remarkable in that we are sort of right at the level of the women's feet. This shows you another use of that tower structure, and there's Xiong's work. You might see some of those later. This is by Gautam. It's a drawing. There's a detail. I'm not showing you everybody's work, just a few, but it's done with pen. And he basically made a drawing that brought together tiles from step wells in India with an aerial view of the tailing ponds in Fort McMurray. So it was very decorative and in the spirit of the kind of thing I'm interested in, and at the same time a strong kind of critical impulse to the work as well. And this is Jorge and Lucy Porta, who are artists from, Jorge's originally from Argentina. They now live in Paris. And they did a video as part of a project where they sort of invented a new international zone, and that was in Antarctica. And you can get an Antarctic passport, although you have to promise to be a good environmental citizen. And then this was my work in that exhibition. Last thing I'm showing you is a few more ship pieces, and then I'm done. So in context of this interest in ships, I recall that when I was about 16, I worked on this replica ship in Winnipeg called the Nonsuch. They had brought it to the prairies after having built this thing for the 300th anniversary of the Hudson Bay Company. And so they brought it into the middle of the prairies and built a building around it. And so as a summer student, I had to climb the rigging and put tar on it and all this sort of stuff. So it seemed like a kind of surreal experience. But something about a ship stayed with me, and so I made that a kind of continued preoccupation in my work. But I'm showing you this work by Maria Teresa Alvis, who is an artist from Latin America who has made a boat work where she's harvested seeds that were, she basically was able to get a hold of from this harbor in Brighton, that these seeds had basically come out of the ballast of ships over a long period of time. Actually, Paul Chartrand just took us to meet, the grad students to meet a woman named Mary Mattingly, who also has a kind of garden boat off the pier in Brooklyn. So this idea of a kind of floating garden was of interest to me. And so I made these studies of garden ships. They're collages with rubber stamping and also some details of photographs printed on balsa wood. And eventually then made this exhibition. And I won't get into the exhibition, but I just wanted to say that in terms of collaboration, I made, I'll say something about that after I go to this. I made this central piece, this insect-like piece with Dixon Bao, who is a former student at Western and is now our preparator in the gallery. And then there was also some of these plexiglass pieces where I took images of historical plants that had been exchanged in the period that this ship would have been sailing and printed them on top of images of the sail. So that's everything from me. I know it was a lot to take in, but it's certainly been a pleasure to talk to you about my work. I think we probably don't have a lot of time for questions, but if there are any questions, I probably overwhelmed you. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them, and otherwise we can talk at the end as a group. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I will try to help with the translation, although I'm not a professional artist, so I'm sorry if I'm not proficient with the specific terms. And I'm also working with Patrick and Gu and the artists more in the historical part of the project related with mining in Ecuador and the history of the Portobello campground.
Yo comenzaré un poco a hablar sobre el último proyecto al que estoy exponiendo aquí, al que fui invitada en el 2015 por Susan, un artista ecuatoriano.
I'm going to talk about the last project I'm working now, beginning in 2015 with the artist, the Ecuadorian artist Ulises Zunda.
Sí, Ulises me invitó a participar de una residencia artística en las poblaciones de Portobelo y Zaruma, dos localidades que están al sur, pequeños pueblos al sur del Ecuador, cuya historia ha estado atravesada por la explotación minera desde la colonia, ¿no?
Ulises invited to an artistic residence in two towns south in Ecuador, Portobelo and Zaruma. These two little towns are located south of Ecuador and are crossed by the history of mining since the colonial times.
Sí, durante 8 días nosotros estuvimos junto con artistas, 8 artistas y artistas artistas ecuatorianos y artistas internacionales, ¿no? Artistas con Patrick de Canadá, con Gu, con Gautam de la India. Estuvimos trabajando y conviviendo un poco ahí, recorriendo los espacios a través de caminatas, de diálogos, ¿no? De esas visitas turísticas que a veces queremos negar.
So over 8 days, 8 artists were wandering around Portobello, doing some dialogues, visits, joining for food, and doing some touristic scoping that is sometimes denied as part of the artistic work itself.
Pero fueron las personas que vivían ahí o que viven, que son gestores culturales, que son artistas, investigadores, ¿no? De la zona, los que me permitieron realmente como abrirme completamente y abrir mis sentidos hacia lo que ellos viven, ¿no?
But was the local people, the local artists, the ones that open my eyes to how they see and feel in the everyday life.
Ecuador es uno de los países más pequeños de Sudamérica y yo no recuerdo haber visitado esta zona, no recuerdo haber visitado Portobello o Zaruma, aunque mi familia dice que sí algún rato me llevaron para Zaruma, que es un pequeño pueblo de estos que estuvimos en la residencia. Y la información que yo tenía era una información como mínima y que estaba mezclada entre una realidad y una ficción, ¿no? Un recuerdo, una memoria, ¿no?
Ecuador is one of the smallest countries in South America, and I don't remember myself having visited these towns in the past, although my family says that we were there sometime. And the transformation, there was a minimal transformation over time of those two towns, and there was a mixture between reality and fiction.
Sí, la residencia y estar con la gente y convivir un momento fue para mí como vivir una parte de la historia de donde se ve construido la modernización, los procesos de modernización en el Ecuador, ¿no? Y además que este momento está conectado mucho con de alguna manera con unos ciertos discursos que se están pronunciando desde el Estado y desde muchos espacios, fuera también de la voz oficial, sobre la explotación de recursos naturales en el Ecuador.
The residency was an opportunity to learn about the history of how modernity was built within Ecuador and how that discussion about modernity in the past was connected with the current discussions on the exploitation of mineral resources and natural resources in Ecuador.
Sí, estar ahí, situarme ahí fue como el primer vínculo para mí importante que establezco con ese territorio, ¿no? Y su historia.
Being there, experiencing the sensations of being there was the first linkage with the territory itself.
Sí, luego para la charla estuve pensando en muchas cosas, cómo un poco me acerco a las imágenes con las que luego trabajo, ¿no? Cómo elaboro esas imágenes y cómo me acerco a las imágenes a través de lo que podríamos denominar archivo, ¿no? El archivo histórico de la zona, ¿no?
For this specific talk, I was thinking about how do I approach the images and what I will call the historical archive or the historical photos themselves.
Y una de las cosas más inquietantes y que te interpelan, ¿no? Como visitante son las de un sinnúmero de archivo en imágenes fotográficas que encontramos, históricas que encontramos en Portobelo, que han sido resguardadas por un grupo de gente que son investigadores, que son gestores y que son, sí, que viven, que están en la zona, ¿no?
One of the most intriguing features is, and that questions the work of herself as an artist, is approaching the photos that were kept by the local historians, the archivists within Portobelo and Salud.
Las reproducciones de las imágenes están en el cotidiano de la gente, están están en los bares, son reproducciones que están en las casas de familia, son reproducciones que todavía pocas están dentro de una reserva como oficial, pero la mayoría de imágenes han sido compiladas o recogidas por estas personas que de alguna manera permiten que los demás tengamos acceso a estas imágenes que tienen que ver con todo el cotidiano, la vida cotidiana y la vida desde comienzos de siglo, donde entra la compañía Sadco, que es una compañía minera extranjera, norteamericana, a crear.
These images are everywhere. You can see them in the streets, in the pubs, in the restaurants, but those images are not kept within a public official repository, and at the same time they have been collected and kept by the people. And there's also a discussion about how those images represent and are represented in everyday life for the people of Portobelo and Zaruma. But also how these historical photos are part of the landscape itself.
Sí,
and sorry, just Portobelo was a mining town that began its operations in the late 19th century and worked until the 1950s.
Entonces eso es como para mí importante, es como la existencia del pueblo es la existencia de este casi archivo, ¿no? De este archivo que no es algo que queda, que es algo que está completamente vivo. El archivo es algo que es parte de su repertorio cotidiano. No es algo que se archiva para ser, para no servir o solo servir para ser visto oficialmente, ¿no? Sino que se activa en el repertorio de la vida cotidiana, ¿no? Como un repertorio cotidiano.
So one of the striking things for Jenny is how the archive is a lived archive, not is a public archive, but on the other side it's within everyday life, and how it activates some perceptions and feelings for the people themselves.
Y de ahí, un poco desde esta relación nace la serie de collage que son los que presentan este proyecto, ¿no? Que se denomina Tea for the 5 o'clock. Y es esto, es una serie como de una construcción, de una experiencia espacio-temporal que es presente, ¿no? Y se hace presente a través de esa alusión al archivo histórico, ¿no?
So the origin of my work is related with a collage of the photos depicted in those archives, and it's entitled T5 o'clock. It's also a way of a dialogue with the space and time and how it is represented for the people within Portobelo. Sorry, I'm not doing just a literal translation. I'm picking up some of Jenny's notes and getting some of her remarks. So if you want to see later, I figure you can have her own notes as well.
Voy a relacionar este trabajo, que es el último, y lo voy a conectar, este trabajo de los collages lo presento como un video performance, que realmente fue hecho casi al final de la residencia, ¿no? Ustedes lo vamos a ver, y conecto este performance realmente con mi trabajo, que ha estado vinculado al performance desde el 1999 comienzo a trabajar mis primeros performances. Entonces vincularé este último trabajo de performance con el trabajo que ustedes verán anterior.
So now we are going to see some of her works, and especially the connection between the work, the collage, with the performance, which is part of her work since 1999.
Vamos a ver un poquito, ¿no? Pero porque ustedes lo van a ver después aquí en la exhibición.
The full video is available at the exhibition. You're all invited to come. We're just seeing a little bit of it.
Voy a conectar un poco con mi trabajo que tiene que ver con el performance, ¿no? Los últimos trabajos que he realizado tienen que ver con estar presente mientras otra acción está ocurriendo, mientras otro performance está ocurriendo. Es una acción de registro que es incapaz de hacer el registro de la acción del performance. Y en esa imposibilidad mi acción se desarrolla al margen de otra acción. Y son los dos últimos trabajos que les voy a enseñar que he trabajado en el 2015, ¿no? Participo de la acción del otro y mi acción acontece mientras registra la acción de la otra persona.
So connecting this with my performance work, I approach performance as being present in the meantime of somebody else's action. That means that my action emerges in the margins of others' action.
Me interesa desplazar, me interesa registrar la acción anterior, pero ir desplazando la acción hacia otros lugares, ¿no? hacia otros espacios temporales. La acción siempre está como al margen de la otra, ¿no?
Jenny was saying she likes to displace the action to other places, to other spaces and times, and the action in those cases occurs at the margins.
Dentro de este proyecto tengo este pequeño, aquí lo puedes leer.
So, just reading what is in the screen, I will summarize actually. So, during the 2015 performance encounter in Quito, there were some actions happening simultaneously. And among those actions, the one that Jenny developed is the one that includes the registration of other actions happening in the same space. The registers included to highlight or write and highlight words and images in newspapers, and this process developed in moments when reading was suspended in different sections of the newspapers of that specific day. So the drawings develops this performative experience and documents the actions done by other artists like José Luis Macas, Rodrigo Viera, and Gabriel Arroyo.
What I do is like after of register in the newspapers some impressions about the performances. I start like doing drawings that register or take the note for the drawings. Take the notes of tomo las notas. Las notas.
Jenny takes notes of the newspapers themselves
para hacer los dibujos.
To transform them into drawings.
Intento tomar el gesto, ¿no? Los gestos principales de las acciones.
She tries to take the main gestures of the actions.
Y quedan después como reescritas en esta especie de registros.
To rewrite them in a new way of register or
reescritas, ¿no?
Rewritten as an artwork itself.
work is, for me, I connect with the present. This kind of how I construct my identity in relation with la relación con la mirada del otro. How
With other sight.
And I think it's some kind of situation that I live. I was living in Amsterdam for 3 years, and I think always my work works in this tension between between my body and how to body like a cuerpo.
Body as an embodiment.
And how I construct myself in relation with who loves me. And thank you very much.
Well, yeah, this is, I'd say, the topic for me today will be engage the public through art project. Actually, from Patrick, we know each other for a very long time and cooperate together for several projects. So today, I just choose some of my artworks relate to the public, then to show you what does it mean to engage the public through art project, through my art practice. So I just quickly to make a context with Ontario here. This is Ontario grade 7's textbooks. They choose my artwork and my writing into the school system. Yeah, so that's how the artwork could be encourage next generations through education system. But first, I would like to show you through the history the China avant-garde exhibition I have participated in 1989. That was a large event. It was labor hyped in the Chinese art history in February 1989. There were over 300 artists and some curators who come to work together to make this first historical art exhibition at the National Gallery of China in Beijing in 1989. That time we have used the no U-turn logo for this exhibition. That means we have to go ahead. We cannot go back. But this, I made an installation and a performance piece for this exhibition called Enclosures, because I try to talk about, as human being, we made our cultures, but we also made enclosures, for all of us. We have to break through those cultural barriers in order to reach the truth of the freedom. But this show was closed after opening 3 hours by police. So that, if we talk about how the artwork have some kind of effect to the public, that was a very good example, because in the 80s in China, the visual arts was a leading change force in the society. So this was the only one English newspaper in China called China Daily, at the time to report about this exhibition. So, meanwhile, at the same time, in '89 was a very specific year for China, through the democracy movement. After that, the Tiananmen massacre happened in June 4th, 1989. I was witnessed what was happening there. So after that, I left China to come to Canada. So this was my first piece after I arrived at BAM Center for the Arts. I spent a month to make the barricade of bicycles June 1st, 1989 at BAM Center, because at the time I saw people use their own bicycles to make a barricade on the street to try to stop army tanks to enter Tiananmen Square. But the tank, though over the bicycles, at that moment, I felt each bicycle just like each person. Many bicycles together, there is a unity. The tank can go over the bicycles, but people's inner power cannot be conquered. So I also, in 1991, I also made a barricade of bicycles installation at the Open Space Gallery in Victoria. I have used over 400 bicycles to make a barricade inside the gallery with slides projection, text on the wall, and paintings on the wall. To talk about that change, art is something we can express, we can remember what has happened in the public. So this one, Smile, was also from one of the exhibition Patrick curated in 1996 at the Open Space in Victoria too. So I made this installation called Smile. I did draw three of us family smile faces, but I also did write a poem to talk about what behind the smile, what kind of situation and the struggle, sufferings we have been through. At the right beginning, when we smile because we don't understand the language. But after all, after we learn the language, then a real smile appearing on our face because we finally could understand people what said to us. So this also was collected by the Washington University in Seattle. They also put in a public space right now there. So there was another installation I made called The Mountains. So I used the mountains as the geographical spaces from China, moved to Canada, and linked to New York City. Because for me, New York City is a cultural mountains. So, and also this was the first show I made for the Chinese Culture Center Museum. The build up that museum, they invited me to make the first installation piece there. Because they try to reform the community, to do some contemporary art instead of traditional work. So I used this concept, the transformation from one place to another place. So here on the floor, I did use three elements, like the sand on the floor to carry on the gold rush time when Chinese first came to North America. Then the railroad track will be carry on the history of Chinese railway workers who walk through the Rocky Mountains. And also after they finish the railway construction, they promised from the CP Rail Company to send them home. It was broken. So they had to stay in Canada without choice. Then they built up Chinatown. So I did use those 500 original Chinatown red bricks for the head of this installation on the floor. But on the wall are large digital photographs to carry on our migrations from China to Canada. So here I also included one historical photos of Chinese workers who stand on a railway track. Then I also made a video of 3 of us family to walk on the railway to carry on the history. That was the image. And also to talk about when I first migration was inside China. I was sent to the countryside as a labor, as a punishment, doing Cultural Revolution time. So our family also reunited here in Canada under Rocky Mountains. So this is the image I have made, to talk about me and you through my daughter who stands in front of Chinese sculptures in the Seattle Art Museum. So this was a poem, I talk about me and the sculpture. Because the sculpture is totally admired in the Western art galleries, museums. But as immigrants, at the right beginning, we were under burden, So to encourage ourselves to go through the culture shocks, to build up our identities, to contribute to this culture, this place, that is an example for us to work hard to achieve our achievement at the time. And also to build up the understanding between the mainstream culture and the minority groups, communities. So this is an image when my wife became Canadian, my friend Jamie Nan, who wrote a poem for her. So this poem was very touching. Sometimes if you read this part here, I don't know if you can see. Yeah, it's very, very touching to understand each other through our friendship built up through those years. But also to find a place called a home. Also, it was very important to us. That was the first house we had bought in Vancouver. It was the cheapest one, on 16 and Main Street. But it needed lots of repair, the house over 90 years. We have to rewire the whole house, repair lots of things. But that was something, through our hands, what we could build up. When I came here, I remember I only have $30 with 2 suitcases. So that's my start in Canada. But to have a house, to have a place to call home, that kind of joy is come after the hard work. So this year also the Canadian, Governor General Nomel, who also came to the opening of my exhibition. I mean, this is not show up. This is talk about the communication between the public and the artist. This one was the public art commissions I had got from the Safeco field in Seattle. They invited me to create a mural about baseball. I never play baseball, but through this commission, I started to go to baseball games to try to feel what that meant to me as an audience. So I finally found out that is the family gather, friends gather to have excitement through the game. That also become a metaphor for me to think about globalization. Every nations, every people could join the game, but to take your reactions, to play first, then we will enjoy through the process. So I made this enamel male in the park. It was like 20 feet long, 7 feet high. You see those baseball cards, baseball balls, and also to come with those famous players. That was the magazines to talk about this work. So this one was in 2001 from the Monstella Photo Biennale in Montreal. They also invited me to create a photo installation about the Chinese community in Montreal. So I went there to do my research. Then I finally found this space for my installation, which was on the St. Laurent Street between those two Chinese gates in Chinatown. So that was very interesting time for me to understand how language is political, is powerful in Quebec, in Montreal. Because in Quebec, they have a language bylaw, 101 bylaw. That means any sign in the public place, the French letter has to be bigger than any other languages. But when I went to Chinatown, I found the Chinese word is much bigger. I was surprised. Then I asked their community. They told me they went to Supreme Court. They were allowed to keep their traditions in the Chinatown district. So that was inspired me to make my photo banner pieces to involve with languages. So here, as you see, I used the 3 languages. The Chinese words was a big one. But to talk about the history of Chinese Canadians who come as a labor, but after they're only allowed to open the restaurant and the laundry, then to have a very little numbers of women who could come here to raise their families was very difficult. A lot of people suicide because they couldn't bring their family here, they couldn't marry, So those how they build up the community of Chinatown. Then also to build up the church, under the church system, to open their language school, to learning the new culture, but to keep their own culture at the same time. So, but to pay for a head tax wasn't not allowed to vote until Chinese Canadians who joined the Second World War. After that, in 1947, the Canadian government finally changed its law to allow Chinese to vote to become real Canadian. But to go through struggle to be proud of Chinese Quebecer Canadians sounds a little bit awkward, right? But to build up that confidence, I am who I am, is very important for individual and also for society, community too. So this was my art practice, in Canada also was made a documentary film, including in a series of immigrant stories through Canadians' history. So you probably can find it from it. Okay, so this one also I did one public project in Shanghai, from Shanghai Biennale at the Shanghai Art Museum. So the title called I Am Shanghaiese. This project, whatever I talk about, those people, I choose the 10 people, they work and live in Shanghai, but they were not born in Shanghai. So I try to talk about those, the people from outside of the local culture actually become a change forces for that place. So, yeah, those are workers from countryside to move into the city, but to be a business person, to the young generations has to walk through them to hold their hopes in their hands. This one was another public art project at the Seattle Columbia City Library, because in Columbia City there are over 20 different minority people who speak many different languages live there. So the library become a place to bring everyone together. So that's why they invite me to make a public art there. So then I finally made the open book format to display those open books on the bookshelf with the language and the poetry in the outdoor space and also children area. But to have those images there to play with the single words, then to show the diversity of that place, but to come together, to have a dream, to let a dream become true. This one also called I Am Canadian in Toronto through the Contact Photo Festival here in 2006. So I made an installation in the subway, I think near to University of Toronto and Chinatown, called the St. Patrick Station there. I found that the train station, subway station is for people come and go. That place is really interesting to carry on this global flow issues. So that's why I choose that place for this piece. This one was another public art project in Richmond, Vancouver area. So here, I used, the idea of as a tourist to point out where you are from that tourist map, to talk about, to point the community, different communities in the city in different places. So like the big image will be a detail of that place, but in the red circle will be the place in the city. So then I choose the Richmond Center, the shopping mall, Arlington Center, and also the temple. From this temple, it could be anywhere in China or here, right? But also from this one, the Richmond Landmark become a public place now for over 50 years. In the summertime, everyone loves to go there shopping, eating, to have fun at that place. And this one was Becoming Rivers was a project that I started called a short grant called Waterscapes. This was the first show I have made for the Museum of Anthropology at UBC. So I have made over 2,000 plastic white bowl to display it from outside of the museum, and it was on the grabs, the grab for fertilization, that means water. So from two directions, finally move into the museum space. But also those boats also bring two different gallery spaces together. I talk about the river, is carry on our hopes, carry on migration flows, carry on the change of our life. So that was a piece. Yeah, but to think about the river, how the Fraser River linked to China, the Yangtze River, where I came from, like this boat. Those classic cars were shipped into Shanghai to be melted, then made the product and sent back to us. Okay, so I have to go faster. So this is a headwater of Yangtze River. I want to show you where it comes from, the migration among the Yangtze River, the Three Gorges Dam. And to talk about the water increase, 175 meters from the original level. And then to see the marks, the change of the land, millions of people forced to move. Just like this concrete layer, is painful for the local community, but also for the nature too. But to come to build up the city of Shanghai, to see the people move in from outside, from countryside to the city, to carry on this type of change, the ordinary people paid a big price, but they are not benefited. So this was my public sculpture at the University of Seiko and cell phone to talk about change from China. And also to link here my current project I'm doing to dealing with the international migrant workers. Tomorrow, not tomorrow, on Saturday, I will have much more details to talk about this. But I just want to show you the last one to link to Ecuador, where I made this installation called the Yellow Cargo. I used 1,500 of banana boxes to make the cargo ship inside the art center in Machala, city of Machala in Ecuador, because that city is the produce of bananas that are shipped to many different countries, especially shipped to China. So that's why I call it yellow. Banana is yellow. The box are yellow too, right? So to have a double meaning there. But if you think about globalization, the cargo ship is between the local and the international. So that can link the change of economy and the cultural and the social issues through the cargo ship, how it linked to one and other places. So on the bike, then I have a video projection of the waterfront from the Machala, the city of Machala. The waterfront is not occupied by rich people. The waterfront is lived with many poor people, working classes there, because they walk around the water. It's different. This is also from above to look at. So I also used thousands of those banana stickers to put on, because those stickers also carry on the history of the banana productions, like this one. This is a pioneer of the banana business who started in Ecuador. And this was the opening time. I found when people fell into that space, then the cargo ship, is moving with people's safety. Right? That's it. I've used those banana logos for that installation. I never know how many different types of banana in the world, all from Ecuador. Okay.